Welcome to our channel, where we bring you gripping, real-life stories that will leave you questioning what you thought you knew. Today's story is no exception, as we dive into the life of a woman whose quiet world is turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Martha Bellamy, a hard-working cleaning lady, has spent her days in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated by those around her. But everything changes when she's accused of something unimaginable, robbing the very bank she's been working for all these years. No one could have seen it coming, not even the bank's owner, who had trusted her for over a decade. What's behind this shocking accusation? Is Martha hiding a secret that could explain it all? Or is there more to this story than meets the eye? Stay tuned as we unravel the mystery and uncover the truth behind this life-altering accusation. So, sit back and get ready, because the story is about to begin. Martha Bellamy walked into the bank that morning just like any other day. Her worn shoes shuffled softly across the polished floors as she made her way to the supply closet, preparing for her usual routine of mopping, dusting, and keeping the place spotless. She liked the quiet. It gave her a chance to think. But today felt different. She could feel it in the air, a certain uneasiness that settled in her stomach as soon as she stepped inside. As she began cleaning the lobby, she noticed the stares. Eyes followed her. Whispers buzzed between the tellers. Martha tried to ignore it, focusing on her work, but the murmurs grew louder. Then, out of nowhere, Henry Carlson, the bank's stern owner, appeared in front of her. His face was hard, colder than usual. "Martha, we need to talk," Henry said, his voice flat and emotionless. Confused, she wiped her hands on her apron and followed him to his office. Her heart pounded as she entered the room, the familiar space suddenly feeling foreign. Henry stood behind his large desk, arms crossed, his jaw set in a rigid line. "Martha," he began, his voice low but pointed, "we have a serious problem. There's money missing from the vault. A large amount. And all the evidence points to you." Martha felt the room spin. "What? That's impossible. I would never." Her voice cracked with disbelief, but Henry didn't seem to care. The accusation hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating her. "The police are on their way," Henry continued. "I'm sorry, Martha, but we have to do this by the book." She barely registered his words as they cut through her like a blade. Police. Arrest. Martha's mind raced. How could this be happening? As the office door opened, and two officers stepped in, Martha's knees buckled beneath her. They escorted her out of the bank, and she could feel the eyes of her co-workers, people she thought knew her, burning into her back. Martha had never felt more alone. Detective John Warren stood at the entrance of the station, a cup of coffee in one hand, as Martha Bellamy was led inside in handcuffs. He'd seen his fair share of criminals, but there was something different about her. Her eyes weren't defiant, they were broken, confused. The whole situation didn't sit right with him, but evidence was evidence, and from what he'd heard, the case against her was strong. The interrogation room was dim, the ticking of the wall clock echoing in the silence. Martha sat quietly, her hands trembling as they rested on the cold metal table. John stepped in, his usual gruff expression softening just slightly as he took a seat across from her. "Martha," he said, his voice steady, "I'm going to be straight with you. We've got fingerprints on the vault door. Your schedule shows you were alone in the bank at the time the money disappeared. And there's a deposit in your account that matches the missing amount. You see why this looks bad, don't you?" Martha looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do it. I swear, I didn't take that money." John studied her face. He'd been doing this long enough to know when someone was lying, but Martha didn't look like someone who'd just stolen thousands of dollars. Still, everything pointed to her. As much as his gut told him to dig deeper, the facts couldn't be ignored. He sighed. Is there anything you're not telling me, Martha? Anything at all? Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. There was something buried deep that she hadn't told anyone in years. But how could she explain it now, when everything was already stacked against her? She shook her head. I'm telling you the truth. John leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Well, the truth better come out soon, because right now, it's looking like you're going to prison for a long time. Outside the room, Henry Carlson paced back and forth in the waiting area. When Detective Warren stepped out to speak with him, Henry's impatience was palpable. Well, is she admitting to it? John shook his head. Not yet. But the evidence is pretty clear. I just want to make sure we're not missing something. Henry scoffed, his frustration bubbling over. Detective, with all due respect, Martha has been working for us for years. I trusted her, but if she did this, she deserves what's coming. John gave a small nod, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. As he left the station that evening, his mind kept returning to one question. Why would someone like Martha, with no history of trouble, suddenly risk everything? As the hours dragged on, Martha sat in the cell, her mind wandering back to a time she had spent years trying to forget. She closed her eyes and let the memories flood back. Memories of a life before this small town, before the quiet routine of cleaning floors and dusting desks. Back then, she was a different person, full of hope and naivety. But all that changed when she met him. Years ago, in another city, Martha had fallen in love with a man named Ray. He was charming, with a smile that could melt anyone's defenses. But beneath that charm was a darkness she hadn't seen until it was too late. Ray had a way of pulling her into his world, a world of shady deals and dangerous people. Before she knew it, Martha was caught up in something she didn't understand, and when things went south, she paid the price. She had been arrested for being an accessory to one of Ray's schemes. It was a small crime, but it left a stain on her record. Martha had spent a few months in jail, and when she got out, she swore she'd never let herself be pulled into something like that again. She moved to this quiet town, changed her name, and built a new life from the ground up. No one here knew about her past. No one knew about Ray. But now, sitting in this cell, Martha felt that old fear creeping back in. If they found out about her record, it would only make things worse. Would they even believe she had changed? She wasn't that person anymore. She had worked so hard to leave that life behind. But the fear gnawed at her. What if someone knew? What if someone had found out and was using her past against her? Just as her thoughts spiraled, the sound of the cell door opening pulled her back to reality. Detective Warren stood in the doorway, a stern look on his face. "Martha, we need to talk again," he said, motioning for her to follow him. As she walked behind him, her heart pounded. She didn't know how much longer she could keep her secret buried. In the interrogation room, Warren sat down, his gaze locked on hers. "There's something you're not telling me," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I can see it in your eyes. If you want to get through this, you need to come clean." Martha's throat tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone? But as the seconds ticked by, she realized she didn't have a choice. If she kept hiding, things would only get worse. She took a deep breath. "There's something I haven't told you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something from my past." Detective Warren leaned forward, listening intently as Martha shared her past, her voice faltering at times, but her resolve steady. She explained everything about Ray, the man who had once ensnared her in his life of crime, and how she had paid for her mistakes years ago. When she finished, Warren sat quietly, processing her words. "That's a tough story, Martha," he finally said, his tone softer than before. But it still doesn't explain the missing money or the deposit in your account." Martha shook her head, desperation creeping into her voice. "I swear, I don't know anything about that money. I didn't take it. I don't even know how that deposit got there." Warren's green eyes narrowed, the detective in him still suspicious but open to the possibility that she was telling the truth. "We'll look into it. For now, stay put." As Warren left the room, doubts began to swirl in his mind. Something wasn't adding up. Martha's past was certainly troubling, but she didn't seem like a woman capable of pulling off a bank heist. Could someone be using her history against her? He needed to dig deeper. Back at the bank, things were tense. Henry Carlson's patience was wearing thin as the investigation dragged on. Angela, his wife, watched him with suspicion. She had always been a keen observer, and lately, Henry's behavior had been off. He was irritable, distracted, and seemed to be hiding something. She hadn't questioned him directly yet, but the nagging feeling in the back of her mind wouldn't go away. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table, the silence between them felt heavy. Angela, unable to hold back any longer, put down her fork and looked directly at her husband. "Henry," she began, her voice calm but firm, "there's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" Henry's eyes darted up, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice defensive. Angela held his gaze. "The money, Henry. This whole situation with Martha, it doesn't add up. You've been acting strange for weeks now. What's really going on?" Henry scoffed, pushing his chair back from the table. "This is ridiculous, Angela. You're reading too much into it. Martha's guilty. The evidence is clear." But Angela wasn't convinced. She knew Henry too well, and something in his tone felt off. She let it drop for now, but inside, her doubts grew stronger. If Henry was hiding something, she would find out soon enough. Meanwhile, Martha's estranged daughter, Claire, had just arrived back in town. After hearing about her mother's arrest, she felt a mix of anger and guilt. Their relationship had been strained for years, ever since Martha had shut herself off emotionally after Claire left for college. Now, faced with the news that her mother might go to prison, Claire didn't know how to feel. She stood outside the police station, debating whether to go inside. Part of her wanted to leave, to continue pretending that her mother's problems weren't her concern. But another part of her, a small voice she hadn't listened to in a long time, told her she needed to be there. With a deep breath, she walked through the doors, hoping she wasn't too late. Detective Warren was not a man to let his instincts rest. The more he examined the case, the more it gnawed at him. Something about Henry Carlson didn't sit right. The pieces weren't fitting as neatly as Henry wanted everyone to believe, and Warren wasn't ready to close the book on Martha's guilt just yet. Back at the station, new evidence came in, a series of irregular financial transactions tied to the bank's internal system. Warren's eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. Large sums of money had been quietly moved around the accounts for months, disguised as legitimate business transfers. And while Martha was in the frame for the vault money, these transactions were clearly the work of someone with access to the bank's deeper financial records. Warren rubbed his chin, his mind racing. He knew Henry had access to everything. But was he sloppy enough to leave a trail like this? And if not Henry, then who? He needed to confront him, but he also knew Henry wasn't going to crack easily. That evening, Warren drove to the Carlson household. The tension in the air was palpable as Henry opened the door, visibly surprised to see the detective standing on his doorstep. Angela appeared behind him, watching with curiosity. "We need to talk, Henry," Warren said, his voice steady but firm. Henry's expression darkened. "Can't this wait until morning, detective? I'm about to have dinner with my wife. Warren shook his head. I don't think it can. It's about the missing money. I found some discrepancies in the bank's records that I need you to explain. Henry's face went pale, but he quickly masked his shock. I don't know what you're talking about. I've cooperated fully with the investigation. Angela stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at her husband. Henry, what's going on? Henry glared at her, frustration bubbling to the surface. Angela, stay out of this. But it was too late. The tension that had been simmering between them finally boiled over. You've been hiding something, haven't you? Angela accused, her voice rising. All this time, blaming Martha when you knew, didn't you? Henry's jaw clenched. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, but his voice wavered. Before Warren could push further, the door behind them creaked open. Claire stepped into the room, her face pale, her eyes searching for her mother. She had heard part of the argument and was trying to piece together the situation. "Where's my mom?" Claire demanded, her voice shaky but determined. "What's happening here?" Warren looked between Henry, Angela, and Claire, realizing the web of lies was about to unravel. He turned to Claire, his voice softening. "Your mother's still at the station, but we're starting to see that things might not be as clear-cut as they seemed." Angela's eyes flicked to her husband, her suspicion now confirmed. "Henry," she whispered, her voice trembling with betrayal, "what did you do?" Henry's facade cracked, the pressure too much to bear. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "The bank's been in trouble for months. I was trying to fix it. But then the money went missing from the vault, and I panicked. I thought if I pointed the finger at Martha, it would buy me time." Claire's heart sank as the truth hit her. Her mother had been framed. All this time, she had blamed Martha for pushing her away, for keeping secrets. But now, the real culprit stood right in front of her. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Henry Carlson stood frozen, his confession still echoing through the room. Detective Warren glanced at him, knowing the gravity of what had just been revealed. The man had framed an innocent woman to cover his own failings. But there was one more piece to this puzzle that needed to be uncovered. "Martha's not the only victim here," Warren said slowly, watching Henry carefully. "I found more than just missing money in the bank records. Someone else was involved in moving funds, someone who knows their way around the system." Henry's face paled further, and for the first time, real fear flashed across his eyes. He knew exactly who Warren was talking about. "Martha wasn't alone," Warren continued, "but she wasn't working with you either. She's been set up by someone else." Suddenly, the front door burst open, and in walked a man from Martha's past, the one person she had hoped she'd never see again, Ray. His face was hardened with years of deceit, his eyes sharp and calculating. He hadn't come back for revenge, though. No, Ray was here because he had seen an opportunity. Using Martha's past and her vulnerable position, he had manipulated the situation to his advantage, shifting money through the bank system while pinning it all on her. "Martha didn't do anything," Ray sneered, addressing the room, "but you'll never prove I had a hand in it. The money's long gone." But Detective Warren was ready. "You're right, Ray. The money may be gone, but I've got enough evidence to put you away for a long time." Ray's smug grin faltered as Warren reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of documents, records of Ray's movements, his involvement in financial fraud that stretched far beyond just this small town. The trap was set, and Ray realized too late that he had walked right into it. As the police arrived to take Ray away, Henry slumped into a chair, his world crashing down around him. His wife Angela stood nearby, her eyes filled with disbelief, knowing their lives would never be the same. Meanwhile, at the station, Claire sat across from her mother. For the first time in years, she saw Martha not as the distant, secretive woman she had grown up with, but as a person. Flawed, yes, but resilient. Martha had been through so much, and despite it all, she had never stopped trying to protect her daughter, even if that meant keeping her at arm's length. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have been here for you." Martha reached across the table, taking Claire's hand in hers. "I'm just glad you're here now," she said softly. "That's all that matters." In the end, the town learned the truth about Martha. She wasn't the criminal they had thought she was. Her dignity restored, Martha walked out of the police station, her head held high. She had fought her battles, faced her past, and come out stronger on the other side. As for Henry, his downfall was swift. His reputation in tatters, he would soon face the consequences of his actions. The bank, once a symbol of his pride, would no longer be his to control. Martha and Claire walked side by side into the setting sun, a mother and daughter finally reunited, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you like the story. Also watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.